All right, for more, let's bring in Frank Gaffney. He's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Ronald Reagan and the CEO at the Center for Security Policy. Frank, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Michelle. Thank you for having me.
So, Frank, as we touched on at the top of the show, there are reports that the leaders of France, Britain and Germany have reached a general agreement regarding getting Iranian forces out of Syria. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's unlikely to succeed, to be frank. I think the Iranians have not only put in their own forces, they've had Iraqi forces that effectively they control, and of course they've had Hezbollah forces there in considerable numbers. So even if the units that are most closely identified with the Iranian military were to be removed, which again I think is unlikely, I think at the end of the day you'll still see an Iranian footprint in and ability to project power from the Syrian territory against Israel.
Frank, you don't think that there'll be success in getting Iran out, even now with Russia, who's been backing Iran's military adventurism, saying that it wants Iran out of Syria and giving Israel the green light to go ahead with strikes at Iranian targets even deeper in the country? You still don't think that that's going to be successful in getting Iran out?
Well, again, I think there may be some motions in the direction of moving some of the conventional forces that Iran has deployed there. That doesn't translate into having the Iranian capability to attack Israel removed or negated. Those attacks by Israel, I think, are going to continue to be needed, and that may have the effect of reducing the threat to Israel posed by these Iranian military personnel and proxy forces. But I just have to tell you, I don't think that the Iranians see this as a moment when they need to actually disengage, much as I'd like to see them do so.
Frank, with regards to the nuclear deal, we have Iran's nuclear chief now inaugurating a new nuclear enrichment facility today. Iran says that it's restarting its uranium enrichment program, but within the limits of the deal. But it has indicated that should the deal fall apart, it'll take a very short time to get that program back up to speed. What do you make of Iran saying this? Is this an attempt to try and get some leverage back here?
Well, of course that's what it's about. But the bigger point is one of the fatal flaws with this so-called Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, was that it allowed Iran to have the ability to continue to enrich uranium and to continue to develop the centrifuges with which to do that. So it shouldn't be any wonder that the Iranians are very quickly able to say, well, we're going to begin enriching uranium. I think it's up to the 25% level. That is something they have the inherent capability to do. I personally have believed that they have been doing it all along, frankly. They're simply now, as you say, trying to insinuate it as a way of extracting concessions from the Europeans or others. The reality, though, is, and this is, I think, precisely why President Trump was absolutely right to say, as has Bibi Netanyahu, this is a fatally flawed deal. In this respect, as in so many others, it delayed, if at all, very, very short period of time, right, the Iranian capability to have nuclear weapons. And that's underlying the problem that we've been facing for some time.
Yeah, just kicking the can down the road there. Now Frank, even with the Europeans staying in the deal, the European companies, they're pulling out of Iran because of the U.S. sanctions, even if the countries are staying in. We've got some recent examples, Peugeot, Citroën, Total and Maersk also winding down operations in Iran. Now, is the Trump strategy to strangle the Iranian economy, which could lead to two outcomes? One, force the Iranians back to the negotiating table to try and get a better deal with more leverage, or two, make those economic hardships, hoping that they'll fuel protests and unrest against the regime and potentially lead to some kind of regime change? Do you think that if that's what the Trump administration is pushing for with the sanction strategy, that it could yield either one of those results?
I can't tell you for certain the president's mind on this, Michelle, but my own feeling about it is, and it's certainly consistent with what John Bolton, his national security advisor, has said for a long time. The only hope for not only reducing and ultimately, hopefully, eliminating a nuclear threat to the West, and by that I mean Israel, I mean Europe, I mean the United States, is a change in the regime in Iran. It's also the only hope, by the way, for the people of Iran to enjoy the lives to which they clearly aspire. This is going to happen, I suspect, if at all, because the people of Iran know finally that the United States, and hopefully its allies, are on their side. Barack Obama, of course, refused to take the opportunity to make that clear in his presidency. To the contrary, he aligned himself very closely with the regime that has oppressed them terribly and threatened us. So this is a sea change, and I hope that it will indeed have the effect of helping the Iranian people, who are, by the way, already in the streets of Tehran and dozens of other cities, as you know, because of the horrible hardships that this regime has imposed upon them, despite having gotten a windfall of $150 billion, for heaven's sakes, in the process of this deal. So I hope that this will have the effect of bringing about conditions that will help the Iranian people liberate themselves from a regime that oppresses them and threatens us.
Yeah, just one of many, many flaws of that deal. Frank Gaffney, appreciate your insight, former Assistant Secretary of Defense under President Ronald Reagan. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you.